I thought I knew my wife. 15 years of marriage, a beautiful daughter, a successful business built with my best friend. Then she came crawling through our front door at 6 a.m., and everything I believed about my life shattered in one morning. What I discovered next made me question everything. My name is Bradley Cartwright, but everyone calls me Brad. I'm 44 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years building my asphalt paving company from nothing into something respectable. We handle everything from driveways to parking lots, and I've got a reputation for quality work that speaks for itself. Hard work, honest sweat, and keeping my word. That's how I was raised, and that's how I run my business. I met Valerie when I was 31 and she was 26. She was working as a receptionist at a medical office, all smiles and charm. We got married 2 years later, and for the longest time, I thought we had something solid. We tried for years to have kids, went through all the doctor visits and treatments that drain your bank account and test your patience. When Emily finally came along 3 years ago, I thought we'd made it through the rough patch. I was wrong. Dexter Holmes has been my business partner and best friend since we were kids. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, and when I started the paving company, Dex was right there with me. He handles the equipment maintenance and job scheduling while I focus on client relations and the actual paving work. We've been through everything together, broke years, good years, family troubles, you name it. I trusted him with my business, my secrets, and apparently, that was my first mistake. The problem started getting obvious about 6 months ago. Valerie began going out more, always with her girlfriends, always to clubs and bars. At first, I didn't think much of it. After Emily was born, well, I'd been stuck at home a lot, and I figured she deserved to blow off some steam. But the nights out became more frequent, and she'd come home later and later, usually smelling like booze and cigarettes. "I need this, Brad," Valerie would say when I'd express my concerns. "I've been cooped up with a toddler all day while you're out working. Can't a woman have some fun?" The thing is, I wasn't just out working for kicks. I was busting my rear end to provide for our family, to make sure Emily had everything she needed and that we could finally afford the house with the big backyard that Valerie had always wanted. Every 12-hour day I put in was for them, but somehow I became the bad guy for worrying when my wife stumbled through the door at 3 in the morning. Last Friday night was supposed to be different. I'd finished a big commercial job ahead of schedule and got home early, hoping to spend some time with Val and Emily. Instead, I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone out with the girls. Emily's at your mom's. Don't wait up." I called her phone. Straight to voicemail. I called again an hour later. Same thing. By midnight, I was pacing the living room like a caged animal, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just a wife having a night out with friends anymore. This felt like betrayal, like she was deliberately shutting me out of her life. When I finally heard her car in the driveway at dawn, I knew my world was about to change forever. At 6:15 in the morning, I heard her car door slam shut in the driveway. The sound cut through the dawn silence like a gunshot. I've been sitting in my recliner for the past hour, staring out the window, my coffee long gone cold. Every scenario I'd imagined during the night was about to be put to the test. The front door handle rattled for what felt like an eternity. Keys dropped on the porch with a metallic clatter, followed by Valerie's muffled cursing. Then came the sound that I'll never forget, the slow scrape of the door opening, followed by what I can only describe as the most pathetic sight I'd ever witnessed. My wife, the mother of my child, crawled through our front doorway on her hands and knees. Her black dress was twisted around her waist. Her hair looked like she'd been through a tornado, and one of her high heels was missing completely. The smell hit me before she even looked up. Alcohol, cigarettes, and something else that made my stomach turn. Cheap cologne that definitely wasn't mine. "Brad." Valerie's voice was slurred as she struggled to focus on me, sitting across the room. "When did you get home, baby?" I stood up slowly, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The sight of her like this, destroyed, pathetic, reeking of another man, sent a wave of disgust and rage through me that I'd never experienced before. "I've been home all night, Valerie," I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane building inside me. "The question is, where the hell have you been?" She tried to push herself up to her feet, but failed, collapsing back against the doorframe with a giggle that sounded more like a whimper. The missing shoe explained everything. She was too drunk to walk properly, too wasted to even stand up with dignity. "Just out with the girls," she mumbled, attempting to smooth down her hair. You know, dancing and stuff. Dancing and stuff. Right. That's why she had hickeys on her neck that I could see, even from across the room. Where's your other shoe, Val? I asked, stepping closer. She looked down at her feet like she was seeing them for the first time. I don't know. Must have lost it somewhere. The casualness in her voice, the complete lack of shame or explanation, it told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just a night of drinking with girlfriends. This was something much worse, something that was about to blow my life apart. Get up, I told her, my voice harder now. We need to talk. But as she struggled to pull herself upright, using the wall for support, I already knew that whatever she was about to tell me would be lies. The truth was written all over her disheveled appearance, and the truth was that my marriage was already over. I helped Valerie to her feet and guided her to the kitchen table, more out of necessity than kindness. She collapsed into the chair like a rag doll, still reeking of another man's presence. My hands shook as I poured myself another cup of coffee, trying to process what I was seeing. So, I said, sitting across from her and keeping my voice level, tell me about your night with the girls. Valerie rubbed her temples and squinted at me like I was speaking a foreign language. What do you want to know, Brad? We went to that new club downtown, had some drinks, danced a little. Normal stuff. Normal stuff. I repeated, studying her face. Is it normal to lose your shoes? Is it normal to come home smelling like cheap cologne? Her eyes darted away from mine. I don't know what you're talking about. I leaned forward. Val, I may work with asphalt all day, but I'm not stupid. That's not your perfume you're wearing. And those marks on your neck sure as hell didn't come from dancing. She instinctively covered her neck with her hand, confirming what I already knew. You're being paranoid, Brad. I was just having fun. With who? I pressed. With the girls. Sarah, Michelle, you know them. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sarah's number. Valerie's eyes went wide. Brad, what are you doing? She whispered urgently. Sarah answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. Hello. Sarah, it's Brad Cartwright. Sorry to wake you, but I need to ask you something. Were you out with Valerie last night? There was a pause. Brad, I was home all night with the kids. Haven't seen Val in weeks. I hung up and stared at my wife. The color had drained from her face completely. Want to try again? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Valerie's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time since she'd crawled through that door, she looked genuinely scared. I can explain, she whispered. I'm listening. But even as I said it, I knew that whatever explanation she gave me would be just another lie. The truth was sitting right there in front of me, written all over her guilty face and disheveled appearance. My wife had been with another man, and now she was going to try to lie her way out of it. The question was, how long had this been going on? I was with Dexter, Valerie finally whispered, the words barely audible. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor, sending hot liquid and ceramic pieces flying everywhere. But I barely noticed. My brain was trying to process what she just said. What did you just say? I asked, my voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. Valerie looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. Brad, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Dexter, my business partner, my best friend since childhood, the man who stood next to me at my wedding, the man I trusted with my livelihood, my secrets, my family. I stood up so fast the chair fell backward behind me. How long? I demanded. Brad, please. How long, Valerie? She flinched at the harshness in my voice. A few months. Maybe longer. I don't know exactly when it started. A few months. While I was out working 12-hour days to provide for our family, my wife and my best friend were sneaking around behind my back. Every time Dex came over for dinner, every time we talked business over beers, every time he played with Emily in our backyard, he was lying to my face. Where? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. What? Where have you been meeting him? Hotels. His place. Valerie's silence was answer enough, but then she said something that made my blood run cold. Sometimes here, she whispered, when you were out on jobs. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. In my house. In my bed. While my 3-year-old daughter was probably playing in the next room. Emily. I said, the realization hitting me. Was Emily here? Valerie nodded miserably. She was usually napping or watching cartoons. She doesn't know anything, Brad. We were careful. Careful. They were careful while they destroyed my life and potentially traumatized my daughter. I walked to the counter and gripped the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. The rage building inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. This wasn't just adultery. This was a complete betrayal of everything I believed in, everything I'd worked for. "Get out," I said quietly. "Brad, get out of my house," I repeated, turning to face her. "Pack your things and get out. Now." Valerie stood up unsteadily. "Where am I supposed to go?" I looked at her with disgust. "Call Dexter. I'm sure he'll take care of you." As she stumbled toward the stairs, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Dex's number. It was time to have a conversation with my former best friend. 20 minutes later, I was standing on my mother's front porch, my hands still shaking from rage. I needed to pick up Emily, but more than that, I needed to talk to someone who would understand what I was going through. Mom had always been my rock, the one person I could count on for honest advice. She opened the door before I could knock, probably hearing my truck in the driveway. "Bradley," she said, taking one look at my face. "What's wrong? Is Emily awake?" I asked. "She's still sleeping, honey. Come in. You look terrible." I followed her into the kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd fed me breakfast every morning before school, where she'd patched up my scraped knees and broken hearts. But this broken heart felt different. This felt permanent. "Mom," I said, sitting down at her kitchen table, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She poured me a cup of coffee and sat across from me. "Of course, son. Did you know about Valerie and Dexter?" The coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. The look that crossed her face, guilt, sadness, resignation, told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. "Oh, Bradley," she whispered. The betrayal hit me like another punch to the gut. "You knew." "I suspected," she said carefully. "I saw them together a few weeks ago at the grocery store. They were too close, too familiar. But I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to say anything unless I was certain. A few weeks ago, I stood up, pacing to the window. Mom, they've been having an affair for months. Months. Bradley, watch your language, she said automatically, then caught herself. I'm sorry. I should have said something. I should have warned you. I turned to face her. Why didn't you? She looked down at her hands. Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I didn't want to be the one to destroy your marriage. Because, she paused. Because your father made me promise never to interfere in your relationships after what happened with that girl in high school. That girl in high school. Lisa Patterson. Mom had warned me she was trouble, and I'd gotten angry, accused her of trying to control my life. When Lisa cheated on me 6 months later, Mom had been there to pick up the pieces, but she'd never said, I told you so. This is different, I said. I know it is. And I failed you by staying quiet. Tears were streaming down her face now. I'm so sorry, son. I sat back down and took her hand. Even in my anger, she was still my mother. It's not your fault, Mom. But I need you to know, Valerie's leaving. The marriage is over. She nodded. What about Emily? Emily stays with me. Valerie can see her, but my daughter isn't going to be raised by a woman who thinks cheating is acceptable. Mom squeezed my hand. What can I do to help? Just be here for Emily when I can't be. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Dexter. We need to talk. I showed the message to my mother. She read it and shook her head. What are you going to do? She asked. I stood up and headed toward the door. I'm going to give him exactly what he deserves. I drove to Dexter's apartment complex with my jaw clenched so tight, I thought my teeth might shatter. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every mile stretched out like torture. By the time I pulled into his parking lot, the rage inside me had crystallized into something cold and focused. He was waiting for me on his second-floor balcony, still in yesterday's clothes. The sight of him, disheveled, guilty, pathetic, made my hands itch to wrap around his throat. Brad, he called down as I got out of the truck. Come up. We need to talk. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, my work boots echoing off the metal steps like gunshots. When I reached his door, he was already holding it open, backing away like he expected me to take a swing at him. Smart man. How long have you been planning this conversation, Dex? I asked, stepping into his living room. How many times have you rehearsed what you were going to say to me? He closed the door behind me and ran his hands through his hair. Brad, I know you're pissed. Pissed? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dex, pissed is what I get when someone cuts me off in traffic. What I am right now doesn't have a name. He backed up until he hit the wall. I never meant for this to happen. Bull, I said, stepping closer. You don't accidentally sleep with your best friend's wife for months. You don't accidentally destroy someone's marriage. You planned this. You wanted this. It wasn't like that, he said desperately. Valerie was lonely, and you were always working, and she just needed someone to talk to. I grabbed him by the shirt and slammed him against the wall. Don't you dare try to make this my fault. His eyes went wide with fear. Brad, please. You want to know what's going to happen now? I said, my face inches from his. You're going to sell me your half of the business for exactly $1. You're going to sign the papers today, and then you're going to disappear from my life forever. I can't do that, he whispered. That business is all I have. Should have thought about that before you decided to screw my wife. I released him and stepped back. You've got 24 hours to get the paperwork together. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you are. He straightened his shirt with shaking hands. What about Valerie? What about her? Are you going to divorce her? I looked at him with disgust. That's between me and my wife. Or should I say, my ex-wife. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Brad, I'm sorry. I really am. I paused at the door without turning around. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. I left him standing there in his apartment, looking like the broken man he'd always been underneath that friendly smile. 20 years of friendship, destroyed in one morning. But as I walked back to my truck, I realized something. I felt lighter than I had in months. The dead weight was finally off my shoulders. When I got back home, Valerie was sitting at the kitchen table with a suitcase beside her, looking like she'd been crying for hours. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair was still a mess, and she'd changed into jeans and an old sweater. For a moment, she almost looked like the woman I'd married all those years ago. Almost. Brad, she said when I walked in, we need to talk. No, we don't, I replied, walking past her to pour myself a cup of coffee. You need to leave. Please, she said, standing up. Just give me 5 minutes to explain. I turned around and looked at her. Explain what, Val? How you been lying to me for months. How you brought another man into our bed while our daughter was in the next room. What exactly do you think you can explain that will make any of this okay? She sat back down heavily. There's something else you need to know. Something in her tone made me pause. What? This isn't the first time, she whispered. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and hit the floor, but this time I didn't care about the mess. What did you just say? There was someone else, 2 years ago, before Emily was born. I stared at her, feeling like I was looking at a complete stranger. Ooh, a guy from a gym. It only lasted a few weeks, and I ended it when I found out I was pregnant. When you found out you were pregnant. The words came out slowly as the implications hit me. Val, are you telling me? Emily is yours, she said quickly. I had the timing worked out. She's definitely yours. I sat down across from her, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. You had the timing worked out? She nodded miserably. I was so scared when I realized what I'd done. But when the doctor gave me the due date, I knew she had to be yours. Had to be. I repeated. Val, do you hear yourself? You're talking about our daughter like she's some kind of science experiment. I know it sounds bad. It sounds insane. I slammed my hand on the table. You've been lying to me for years. Our entire marriage has been built on lies. Not everything was a lie, she said desperately. I do love you, Brad. I love our family. I laughed, but it was hollow and bitter. You love our family? You've been sleeping with other men for years. You brought Dexter into our home, into our bed, while our daughter was sleeping down the hall. That's your idea of love. She started crying again. I made mistakes. Mistakes. I stood up, pacing to the window. Val, cheating on your husband isn't a mistake. It's a choice. And you've been making that choice over and over again for years. What about counseling? She asked desperately. What about trying to work things out? I turned to face her. Work what out? The fact that you're a liar? The fact that I can't trust a single word that comes out of your mouth? The fact that every time I leave town for work, I'll wonder who you're sleeping with? She didn't have an answer for that. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm and steady. You're going to take that suitcase and leave. You can see Emily on weekends, supervise visits until we get the custody arrangement sorted out. And you're going to sign whatever papers my lawyer puts in front of you. Brad, please. This conversation is over, Valerie. Your marriage is over. Get out of my house. She picked up her suitcase with shaking hands and headed toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. I really did love you, she said. No, I replied. You loved the security I provided. You loved having a husband who worked hard and didn't ask questions. But you never loved me. After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the pieces of my broken life, and realized something. For the first time in months, the house felt peaceful. Later that afternoon, I was cleaning out Valerie's dresser when I found it. A shoebox hidden in the back of her closet, behind her winter coats. Inside were letters, cards, and photographs that told the story of a woman I'd never really known. The first letter was dated 3 years ago, signed by someone named David. It was explicit, romantic, and made references to meetings at hotels and lies told to the husband. My hands shook as I read it, realizing that Valerie's betrayal went back even further than she'd admitted. There were more letters from David, spanning several months. Then they stopped, and new ones began, from someone named Jake. Then another man named Tony. And finally, more recent ones from Dexter, some of them sent just weeks ago. She hadn't just cheated twice. She'd been cheating throughout our entire marriage. The photographs were worse. Pictures of her with different men at restaurants, hotels, and places I didn't recognize. In some of them, she was wearing jewelry I'd never seen before. Gift from her lovers, apparently. But the worst discovery was at the bottom of the box. A pregnancy test and a doctor's appointment card dated 4 years ago. The appointment was with a different doctor than the one we'd been seeing for fertility treatments, and it was scheduled for what looked like genetic testing. My phone rang, startling me out of my shock. It was my lawyer, Mike Patterson. Brad, he said, I've got some information for you. I ran that background check on Valerie like you asked. What did you find? She's got credit cards you don't know about. 3 of them, all maxed out. Looks like she's been spending money on hotels, restaurants, shopping trips. We're talking about $30,000 in debt. I closed my eyes. Anything else? Yeah. She's been in contact with a divorce attorney for the past 2 months. Filed preliminary paperwork, but never followed through. She was planning to leave me. I said, more to myself than to him. Looks that way. But here's the interesting part. She withdrew the paperwork last month. Right around the time, she would have realized you were getting suspicious. I hung up and looked around at the evidence of my wife's deception scattered across the bedroom floor. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been planning to destroy me financially and emotionally, then changed her mind when she realized I was catching on. The woman I thought I married had never existed. She'd been playing a role for years, and I'd been too trusting, too focused on work, too naive to see it. But I wasn't naive anymore. I gathered up all the evidence, put it in a box, and called my lawyer back. Mike, I said when he answered, I need you to come over here. I've got something that's going to change everything. As I waited for him to arrive, I made myself a promise. Valerie might have played me for a fool for years, but that version of Brad Cartwright was dead and buried. The man she'd created through her betrayal was going to make sure she got exactly what she deserved. 6 months later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, signing the final divorce papers. The evidence we'd gathered had been devastating. Not just the affairs, but the financial fraud, the secret credit cards, and the planned abandonment. Valerie had tried to fight it at first, but when faced with years of documented betrayal, even her lawyer had advised her to settle. The judge awarded you full custody of Emily, Mike Patterson said, sliding the papers across his desk. Valerie gets supervised visitation every other weekend, and she's required to pay child support. Child support? I asked. How's she going to manage that? That's her problem now. The court doesn't care that she maxed out credit cards on her affairs. He leaned back in his chair. What about Dexter? He signed over his half of the business for exactly what I asked, $1. Couldn't afford to fight it once word got around town about what he'd done. I signed the last document. Lost most of his friends. Can't get work anywhere in the county. Last I heard, he was moving to Florida. And the paternity test. Emily's mine. Never had any real doubt, but I needed to be sure. I stood up and shook his hand. Thanks for everything, Mike. You did the right thing, Brad. Some men would have tried to work it out. Some men don't have self-respect. I drove home to find Emily playing in the backyard with my mother, who'd been helping with childcare while I rebuilt my life. At 3 years old, Emily was too young to understand why Mommy didn't live with us anymore, but she seemed happy and adjusted. Daddy, she called out, running to me with dirt-stained hands and a bright smile. Hey, princess, I said, scooping her up. What have you been doing? Planting flowers with Grandma. I looked over at my mother, who was beaming with pride. Thank you. I mouthed to her. That evening, after Emily was asleep, I sat on my back porch with a beer, looking out the life I'd built from the ashes of my marriage. The paving business was thriving. Word had gotten around about how I'd handled the situation, and somehow that had translated into more clients who respected a man who stood up for himself. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Miller, a teacher at Emily's daycare who'd been asking me to coffee for the past month. I'd finally said yes, and we had a date planned for Saturday night. I wasn't ready for anything serious yet, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could trust my judgment again. The man Valerie had tried to make me into, the doormat who worked all day and asked no questions, was gone forever. In his place was someone stronger, someone who knew his worth and wouldn't settle for less than he deserved. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I stood in my backyard watching Emily play on the swing set I'd built for her 5th birthday. She was laughing and calling for me to push her higher, her blonde hair flying in the wind. The sound of her laughter was the best thing in my world. Higher, Daddy. Hold on tight. I called back, giving her another push. Sarah Miller, now Sarah Cartwright, my wife of 6 months, came out of the house carrying glasses of lemonade. She'd moved in gradually over the past year, and Emily had taken to her immediately. Sarah never tried to replace Valerie as Emily's mother, but she provided the stable, loving female presence my daughter needed. How are my 2 favorite people? Sarah asked, handing me a glass. We're perfect, I said, kissing her forehead. Aren't we, Em? Yes, Emily called from the swing. Sarah, watch how high I can go. I watched my wife smile at my daughter with genuine affection and felt that familiar sense of gratitude that had become part of my daily life. This was what a real marriage looked like. 2 people who respected each other, supported each other, and put family first. Valerie still had her supervised visits every other weekend, though she'd missed more than half of them the past year. She'd moved 3 hours away with some new boyfriend, guy number 4 or 5 since our divorce. I'd lost count. Emily would ask about her sometimes, but she'd stop crying when Valerie didn't show up. My business had expanded to include 3 full-time employees, and I was considering opening a 2nd location. The scandal with Valerie and Dexter had died down, replaced by newer gossip, but the respect I'd earned for handling it properly had never faded. Last month, I'd run into Dexter at a gas station when I was traveling for work. He looked terrible, older, beaten down, alone. He tried to approach me, maybe to apologize or ask for forgiveness, but I'd simply turned and walked away. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. Daddy, Emily called out, interrupting my thoughts. Will you push Sarah too? I don't think the swing will hold both of us, Sarah laughed. We can try, I said, wrapping my arms around my wife from behind and lifting her onto the swing beside Emily. As I pushed both of my girls, listening to their laughter mixed together in the evening air, I realized something profound. Valerie's betrayal had been the best thing that ever happened to me. It had forced me to become the man I was supposed to be, to build the life I actually deserved. The pain was gone now, replaced by something better, a deep appreciation for authentic love, honest communication, and the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with redemption.